Imagine waking up one day and realizing you've never truly made a decision, not one born from clarity, not one rooted in desire, only decisions born from fear, subtle, camouflaged, justified. You took that job because it was secure. You stayed in that relationship because being alone felt unbearable. You kept quiet in that room because speaking might have made you visible, and being visible meant being judged, being rejected, being hurt, so you shrink and you smile, and you call it maturity, pragmatism, being realistic, but deep down you feel it. The life you are living isn't yours. It's a shelter, a performance, a set of walls you keep mistaking for a home. And those walls, they were built brick by brick with fear. It's not the loud, shaking kind of fear that screams danger in your ears. It's quieter, smarter. It disguises itself as reason. Don't risk it. Don't speak up. Don't try something new. What if you fail? What if they laugh? What if they leave? And so you obey. You become the person fear has trained you to be. You call it your personality. But is it? Or is it just the cumulative result of every time you said no to your soul? What if fear doesn't just influence your life, but becomes your life? Not just a feeling you experience during danger, but a framework that shapes how you think, choose, relate, and love. What if most people aren't living, they're calculating? They're not creating, they're avoiding. They're not moving toward joy, they're running from pain. And what happens to a human being who builds their entire life around avoidance? They become ghosts, not dead, but not alive either. It's strange, isn't it? We admire courage in others, the rebel, the artist, the wild heart who walks away from everything conventional. We romanticize fearlessness in movies, in literature, in revolutions, but when it comes time to choose for ourselves, we hesitate. Why? Because fear is efficient, predictable. It gives you a script and says, just follow this. You won't get hurt. But what it doesn't tell you is that you won't live either. Here's the paradox no one warns you about. Fear protects you from pain by stealing your life. It promises safety, but demands your authenticity. It offers comfort, but costs you meaning. It keeps you hidden, but convinces you that invisibility is peace, and we agree to the terms, without ever reading the fine print, because we think fear is something that visits us occasionally. We don't realize it's moved in, decorated the walls, rewritten our story, and put our soul on mute. So ask yourself, who would you be if fear had never shaped you? What would you have done? Who would you have loved? What would you have said if you weren't so terrified of what might happen next? And if those questions burn a little, good. That means something real is waking up, because this isn't just about fight or flight. It's about something deeper, something more existential. It's about the entire architecture of your being, your beliefs, your identity, your habits, your relationships. They may not be reflections of your truth, but monuments to your fear. So now, the real question, heavy and unignorable. What does it cost you to keep building your life around fear? And more importantly, what would it take to stop? Let's go deeper. Let's strip away the justifications. Let's dig into the roots of how fear slowly transforms from a passing emotion into a permanent architecture. Because before we can escape the prison, we have to understand how it was built. Fear begins, innocently enough, a natural, biological signaler whisper from your nervous system saying, stay safe. And for most of our evolutionary history, that whisper was vital. It kept us alive when predators stalked the edges of the dark. It warned us when cliffs were too steep or berries too bright. Fear was the mind's guardian, but something changed. We stopped running from lions. We started running from ourselves. In the modern world, fear no longer protects us from death. It protects us from discomfort, embarrassment, shame, rejection, failure. But these are not mortal threats. They are emotional ones, psychological, existential, and yet they feel just as dangerous. Because today, fear has a new domain, the ego, the carefully constructed image of self we present to the world. And the ego, fragile, curated, addicted to validation, treats every crack as catastrophe. So fear evolves. It moves from instinct to identity, from I feel afraid to I must live in a way that avoids fear entirely. This shift is subtle and it's silent. You don't even notice when fear stops being an emotion and becomes your compass. You don't recognize the moment you stop choosing what you want and start choosing what won't hurt. And the scariest part, you'll convince yourself this is wisdom. You'll call it being careful. You'll say, I'm just not that type of person. You'll insist this is the responsible thing to do. But what if you're not being responsible? What if you're just being ruled? Carl Jung once wrote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. This is the crux of it. Fear becomes a lifestyle, not because we enjoy it, but because it helps us avoid the most painful confrontation of all, who we truly are beneath the masks. Because to live without fear means to risk exposure. It means to say, here I am, flawed, wanting, vulnerable, and most of us would rather be anything else. Friedrich Nietzsche called this the herd instinct, the deep unconscious drive to conform, to not stand out, not deviate, not threaten the order. Why? Because deviation means danger. In tribal times, if you were different, you were outcast. If you were outcast, you were alone. If you were alone, you were dead. That instinct never left us. It just changed costumes. Now, it looks like anxiety in social situations, like staying in unfulfilling jobs because what would people think if I quit? Like never saying, I love you, first. It's not the world that chains us anymore. It's our inherited wiring. But fear isn't just a product of biology. It's a cultural commodity. Modern society is built on it intentionally. Consumerism, for instance, thrives on your insecurity. It tells you you're not enough. Unless you buy this, you're not beautiful. Unless you look like them, you're not worthy. Unless you produce more. And so, fear multiplies. Not the primal fear of lions, but the existential fear of inadequacy. You are kept afraid not of death, but of irrelevance. And in this state, you're easy to manipulate, easy to sell to, easy to control. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that suffering is the essential condition of life. But modern society offers a tempting promise. What if you didn't have to suffer at all? What if you could avoid every sting, every ache, every moment of discomfort? And fear becomes the path to that illusion. It teaches you to trade desire for safety, dreams for routines, boldness for blandness. You stop chasing what matters and start managing what's acceptable. Think of how this rewires you psychologically. Each time you avoid something scarier, confrontation, a risk, a change, your brain releases relief, a chemical reward, a signal that says, good, you didn't die. And this is addictive, because relief feels like peace, even when it's just avoidance. So you repeat the behavior. And over time, your comfort zone shrinks. What used to be mildly uncomfortable now feels impossible. Eventually, you no longer trust your own resilience. You trust only what is known. What is repeatable? What is safe? Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." But fear robs you of that freedom by convincing you you're still powerless, that you cannot handle the pain, that you're too fragile to face the unknown, that you need to be smaller, quieter, safer. This isn't protection. It's imprisonment, and the bars are made of your own thoughts. So now we stand at a painful realization. Fear doesn't just affect our choices. It becomes our philosophy, a silent creed, a way of thinking so ingrained we mistake it for wisdom. But behind the illusion of safety is a terrible cost. A cost we'll explore next, because fear is never satisfied. It demands more with each compromise, and eventually the price isn't just your dreams. It's your entire identity. You don't wake up one morning and say, "Today I will live in fear." You just stop reaching, stop questioning, stop dreaming. You learn to rationalize, to frame it as maturity. You call it realism. You tell yourself this is what grown-ups do. They compromise. But underneath the logic, something is dying, and the tragedy. You don't even notice, because the death is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, slow, sanctioned. That's how fear wins. Not through force, but through fatigue. Imagine this. A person lives their life, never asking for what they truly want. They stay in relationships that feel hollow. They take jobs that drain them. They decline invitations that might lead to transformation. They convince themselves that all of this is fine. It's not that bad, they say. At least I'm secure. At least I'm not failing. But what if not failing is just a polite way of describing a life that never begins? What if all this comfort is killing them quietly? Fear has a strange way of reshaping time. It makes the present feel permanent, and the future feel impossible. You postpone, you defer, you say, "One day, when I'm ready," but readiness never arrives. Because the longer you wait, the more intimidating the leap becomes. This is the feedback loop of avoidance. The more you avoid fear, the more power it gains. The more power it gains, the smaller you feel. And the smaller you feel, the more you avoid. Eventually, you're living in a psychological cage, carefully disguised as a stable life. But safety, when taken too far, becomes suffocation. There's a term in psychology, learned helplessness. It's what happens when someone internalizes the belief that nothing they do will change their situation. Originally discovered through experiments on animals, this condition happens when a subject is repeatedly exposed to pain or discomfort. It can't escape. Eventually, it stops trying even when escape becomes possible. This is what fear does to us on a societal scale. We stop trying to change careers because we failed once. We stop trying to love again because one person broke us. We stop speaking our truths because someone laughed when we did. Over time, the belief sets in, "I can't." And soon after, a worse belief takes hold. "I shouldn't." These inner beliefs shape everything. They color our relationships. Because fear of rejection leads to emotional dishonesty. They shape our ambitions because fear of failure means we aim lower than we should. They govern our creativity because fear of judgment makes us silence our most original thoughts. We censor ourselves before the world ever gets a chance to. We become our own tyrants, our own prison guards. and we forget what it even feels like to be free. Neurologically, this isn't just metaphor, it's chemical. Fear activates the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for threat detection. Repeated activation without resolution leads to chronic stress. Cortisol floods the system. Decision-making shifts from the prefrontal cortex, the rational planning part of the brain, to the limbic system, the survival mode. In other words, you stop thinking like a creator and start thinking like prey. You don't see opportunities, you see risks. You don't see potential, you see threat. You don't feel excitement, you feel dread. Over time, this becomes your default operating system, not because life is dangerous, but because fear has hijacked your perception of it. Now take this on a cultural scale. Entire societies built on chronic fear. Media that sensationalizes every threat. Schools that reward obedience over imagination. Workplaces that punish dissent more than mediocrity. And we wonder why people stop asking questions. Why they numb themselves with endless scrolling. Why addiction, anxiety, and depression skyrocket year after year. We don't need monsters anymore. We've become afraid of life itself. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that suffering ceases to be suffering when it finds meaning. But fear has robbed us of that power. When you avoid discomfort at all costs, you also avoid the very trials that give life meaning. Pain becomes pointless. Struggle becomes something to evade, not something to learn from, so you drift. You fill your days with distractions. You seek pleasure, not purpose. And still, something inside you aches. That ache is not dysfunction. It's your soul trying to wake you up. What are the unseen consequences of a fear-based life? They are the dreams that never materialized, the friendships that remained shallow, the truths that were never spoken, the person you might have become, if only you had risked being uncomfortable. They are not loud, but they are devastating, because they represent something far worse than failure, unlived potential, and what could be more tragic than living a life that wasn't truly yours? So ask yourself, when did you start calling your fear maturity? When did you begin confusing safety with peace? When did you give up wonder in exchange for predictability? The answers may be buried under years of habit, but they're still there beneath the caution, beneath the resignation, beneath the polished mask you show the world. There is a version of you who still believes in freedom, who still feels the pull of something wild, uncertain, and deeply true. But that version of you is waiting not for the world to be safe, but for you to decide that safety is no longer worth the cost. So what do you do when you realize you've been living a life shaped more by avoidance than intention? What happens when you finally understand that fear has not just whispered in your ear but has been steering the wheel? The first instinct might be panic or regret, but don't run from that discomfort. Sit with it, let it burn, let it expose everything you've sacrificed at the altar of caution, because this moment, this painful clarity, is not the end, it's the beginning. The first act of rebellion is awareness. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire and revolution. Sometimes it looks like a whisper in a quiet room. I'm not doing this anymore. Sometimes it looks like hitting send on the message you were too afraid to write. Sometimes it's turning down the job that checks all the boxes but deadens your spirit. Sometimes it's walking away from the person who makes you feel small, even if you've loved them for years. The point is not the action itself, but what it represents, a reclaiming of authorship over your life. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, It will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most people think they are making choices, but in truth, they're reacting over and over to an unexamined fear narrative inherited from childhood, culture, trauma. They don't follow dreams, they follow scripts. But once you see the script, you can question it. And once you question it, you can rewrite it. This is the heart of all transformation. You stop living as a product of your fears and begin living as a reflection of your values. But make no mistake, freedom has a price. You'll lose things: comfort, predictability, approval. You may lose friends who liked the version of you that never challenged the status quo. You may lose family closeness if your growth confronts their stagnancy. You may even lose your old identity, the one you clung to because it kept you from standing out too much. But what you gain, that's where the beauty lives. You gain self-respect. You gain authenticity. You gain the quiet power of looking in the mirror and knowing you didn't betray yourself again. Fear thrives in the abstract. It feeds on vague futures and imagined catastrophes, so one of the most radical tools in breaking fear's hold is precision. Define what you're actually afraid of. Name it, write it down, unmask it. You'll often find that what you feared wasn't death, humiliation, or failure. It was discomfort, a temporary feeling, and no feeling, no matter how intense, can kill you. But a lifetime of avoidance just might. There's a paradox here. The more you expose yourself to the things that scare you, the less power they hold. This is not motivational fluff, it's science. Exposure therapy, one of the most effective treatments for phobias and anxiety disorders, proves this again and again. When you voluntarily confront what you fear, your brain literally your amygdala quiets. Your tolerance for uncertainty increases. Your sense of agency strengthens. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else, freedom, truth, love, is more important. History is full of people who chose rebellion over resignation. Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat. Nelson Mandela, enduring 27 years of prison rather than surrender his vision. Kierkegaard, walking away from societal expectations to live a radically honest, philosophical life. Each of them faced fear. Each of them paid dearly. But each of them lived more fully than those who simply complied. Their rebellion wasn't just external, it was existential. They chose meaning over comfort. They chose integrity over ease. So can you. But rebellion doesn't always need to be grand. In fact, the most powerful ones often begin in the quietest places. The moment you say, "I am no longer going to betray myself for belonging." The moment you dare to write the story you were always too afraid to write. The moment you take the first trembling step into the unknown. With no map but your inner compass. These acts may not make headlines, but they will change your world. Because the minute you stop living in fear, the landscape of your life shifts. Reclaiming your life from fear is not a single decision. It's 1,000 small ones. Every time you choose honesty over appeasement. Every time you act despite the tightness in your chest. Every time you tell fear, "I hear you, but you don't make my decisions anymore." And some days, you'll fall back into the pattern. You'll hesitate, you'll avoid, you'll rationalize. That's okay. The goal isn't perfect. Awareness and return. Again and again, you return to yourself. That's what makes the difference. Ask yourself, what would your life look like if fear didn't run the show? What conversation would you start? What project would you launch? What version of yourself would finally emerge from hiding? The answers to these questions aren't just hypotheticals. They're the roadmap to your freedom. But freedom doesn't come to those who wait. It comes to those who walk toward the fire. And here's the irony that only the brave discover. Once you face what you feared most, you often find it was never as powerful as you believed. The walls weren't made of steel. They were paper, painted with your own imagination, and the key to the door was always in your hand. There comes a flicker in time when all the noise quiets, the arguments in your head, the phantom threats of rejection, failure, humiliation. They stop shouting, and in their place, a strange silence, not emptiness, but clarity. And from this stillness rises a truth not whispered by a guru, not discovered in a book, but something that has always lived inside you, hidden beneath the rubble of fear. You were never meant to live a life governed by avoidance. Your soul was not built to shrink. Your breath wasn't designed to be held hostage by caution. Your existence is not a problem to be managed, it's a spark to be lived. And suddenly it all makes sense. All the years of numbness, all the hollow achievements, all the relationships where you performed instead of connected. It wasn't because you were broken or lazy or ungrateful. It was because you were afraid, but fear didn't protect you. It sedated you, and now you're waking up. Here's the ultimate paradox. The thing you've been avoiding is the only thing that could have ever set you free. Pain, emotional risk, vulnerability, disappointment, failure. You've built a life designed to sidestep these, and in doing so, you've sidestepped yourself, because life doesn't happen in the avoidance of pain. It happens in the space where you're willing to feel it deeply, fully, honestly. That's where joy is born. Not in the absence of suffering, but in the courage to walk through it with open eyes. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and wrote Man's Search for Meaning, said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Fear makes you obsessed with controlling outcomes, perceptions, possibilities. But meaning arises not from control, but from surrender. Not passive resignation, but courageous surrender, the kind that says, I don't know what will happen if I follow my truth, but I know what happens if I don't. I vanish, and you are not here to vanish. Every time you feel fear, you are being invited not to run, but to meet the edges of yourself, because fear always appears at the border of expansion. It is the guardian at the gate of growth. If you go backward, you reinforce the lie, I can't handle this. But if you move forward, Devon trembling, even messy, you teach your nervous system something holy. I can survive this. I can hold this discomfort. I can walk through the fire and still recognize myself on the other side. This is what builds resilience, not positive affirmations, not forced optimism, but earned evidence through action. And then something miraculous happens. Your world starts to change, not because the world itself changes, but because you are no longer filtering it through fear. You no longer interpret risk as threat. You no longer see rejection as proof of unworthiness. You no longer hear discomfort and immediately retreat. You begin to live, really live. You laugh louder. You cry deeper. You speak without rehearsing every word in your head first. You stop performing. You start participating. This is the essence of courage, not heroism, not recklessness, not the absence of fear, but a deep, grounded decision to move forward anyway, to love when it might end, to try when you might fail, to speak when you might be misunderstood, to be seen when hiding feels safer. And yes, it costs something. but so does every alternative. A life governed by fear is not safe. It is simply predictable. And predictability is not the same as peace. Peace is what you find when you stop lying to yourself, when you stop saying, "I'm fine," and admit you're aching. When you stop saying, "maybe one day," and decide today is the only guarantee. When you stop saying, "that's just how I am," and realize you were conditioned to be that way. You were not born afraid of being disliked, rejected, or exposed. You were born wild and open and curious. Fear was installed, but what was learned can be unlearned. What was inherited can be released, and in its place, something ancient and powerful awakens, your original self, the one who knows how to trust the unknown, the one who follows meaning instead of comfort, the one who is willing to feel everything because they know that's where the aliveness lives. So here is the truth. If you're ready for it, fear only becomes a lifestyle when you forget you. Have a choice, and choice is the most sacred thing you will ever possess. You can choose truth over safety. You can choose depth over numbness. You can choose freedom over approval. You can choose to stop running right here, right now. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to stop letting fear drive, because when fear stops being your master, it becomes something else entirely, a compass, a teacher, a signpost pointing you toward the life you were always meant to live. And maybe, at the very end of it all, when you look back on your life, the question won't be, did I avoid pain? It will be, did I live fully? Did I love boldly? Did I show up even when I was scared? Because that is the measure of a life well lived. Not its ease, but its honesty. Not its comfort, but its courage. And now the question becomes, what will you do with this truth? Will you go back to sleep? Or will you rise, tender, trembling, awakened, start again?